You can laugh at the setup, Ethan Brooks said with the faintest smile. But don't laugh at someone's hope, because sometimes that's the only thing keeping them standing. The laughter around the corner booth softened for just a second before someone muttered that he sounded exactly like the old Navy guy they all knew, too serious, too polite, too impossible to embarrass. The little Italian restaurant buzzed with the warm noise of Friday evening. Silverware chimed against ceramic plates. The scent of fresh garlic bread drifted through the dining room while soft jazz floated from hidden speakers above exposed brick walls. Outside, a gentle spring rain painted the sidewalks of Charleston, South Carolina, making the streetlights shimmer across the wet pavement like scattered pieces of gold. Ethan sat alone at a table meant for two, wearing a neatly pressed navy blue button-down shirt instead of the faded work jacket everyone at the marina was used to seeing. His broad shoulders still carried the quiet posture of someone who had spent years serving in uniform, but his calm blue eyes revealed something far gentler than discipline. They carried patience. They carried loss. Most of all, they carried the habit of expecting disappointment without ever becoming bitter because of it. He glanced at the simple wristwatch his late wife had given him 15 years earlier. 7:23. Whoever this blind date was, she was late. Or maybe she had realized what everyone else already believed. Dating a widowed single dad wasn't exactly the exciting surprise most people imagined when agreeing to meet a stranger. Across the room, hidden behind an oversized potted fern, 3 of Ethan's coworkers struggled to hold back their laughter. Mike nearly spilled his iced tea while nudging Trevor with his elbow. "I can't believe he actually came," Trevor whispered. "I told you he wouldn't." "You underestimate guilt," Mike grinned. "Tell Ethan it's for charity, and he'd probably volunteer to wash every fishing boat in the harbor." They laughed again, though quieter this time. None of them were cruel men. They genuinely cared about Ethan. They had watched him work double shifts at the marina after leaving the Navy. They had watched him leave every afternoon at exactly 4:30 to pick up his 10-year-old son Noah from school. They had watched him politely decline every invitation to parties, football weekends, and holiday trips because, as he always said, "My son gets my weekends." They also knew something Ethan never admitted aloud. Since losing his wife 6 years ago, he had never allowed another woman close enough to break the careful walls he had built around his heart. Tonight had been their ridiculous attempt to change that. Ethan folded his hands together and quietly watched families sharing dinner nearby. A little boy laughed as his father pretended the spaghetti was too hot. An elderly couple split one slice of cheesecake without saying much at all. A young mother wiped tomato sauce from her daughter's cheek before smiling as though it were the easiest thing in the world. Ethan looked away before anyone noticed the sadness that briefly crossed his face. He had learned long ago that loneliness rarely announced itself loudly. Most evenings it simply sat beside you like an old friend who never asked permission. The front door chimed. Every head near the entrance turned for only a heartbeat before returning to their conversations. Ethan looked up without expectation. A woman stepped inside holding a folded umbrella, brushing tiny raindrops from the sleeve of her light beige coat. She wasn't dressed for attention. No expensive jewelry. No dramatic entrance. Just quiet confidence mixed with visible uncertainty. Claire Sullivan paused near the hostess stand as if wondering whether turning around would be less awkward than continuing forward. She had almost convinced herself to leave twice during the drive over. Blind dates belonged to people who still believed timing could be kind. She had stopped believing that years ago. Then she noticed a man sitting alone by the window. He wasn't staring at his phone. He wasn't looking impatient. He wasn't rehearsing clever lines. He simply stood as their eyes met, offering the kind of respectful smile that asked for nothing in return. Before Claire could take another step, a tiny voice beside her whispered with complete honesty, "Mom, is that him?" Claire looked down in surprise. "Lily, I told you to stay in the car with Aunt Megan." The 7-year-old lowered her head sheepishly before reaching for her mother's hand. "I wanted to make sure he smiled." Claire sighed softly, embarrassed. "I'm so sorry." Ethan walked toward them, his expression warm rather than confused. "No apology needed. he said gently. Lily peeked from behind her mother's coat, studying him with remarkable seriousness. Children, Ethan had always believed, noticed things adults spent years learning to ignore. She looked at his eyes first. Then at the small silver anchor pin attached to his jacket. Then at the weathered wedding band still resting on a chain beneath his collar, barely visible for an instant before disappearing again. She didn't ask about any of it. Instead, she smiled with the fearless sincerity only children possess. "You look lonely," she said quietly. The restaurant seemed to grow strangely still. Even the laughter behind the potted fern faded into silence. Ethan blinked once before answering with complete honesty. "Sometimes," he admitted. Lily nodded as though he had passed some invisible test no one else knew existed. She reached forward, slipped her tiny hand into his for the briefest moment, and asked the question that none of the adults would ever forget. "Will you stay?" "I do not see myself as lonely," Ethan answered after a quiet pause. "I see myself as someone who learned to carry silence without letting it become anger." Lily looked at him for another moment before nodding as though that answer made perfect sense. Claire smiled apologetically and gently brushed a loose strand of blonde hair behind her daughter's ear. "She asks questions that most adults avoid," she said. Ethan chuckled softly. "Those are usually the important ones." The tension around the table eased almost immediately. It was not because anyone suddenly became comfortable, but because none of them tried to pretend they were someone else. The hostess returned carrying an extra chair, smiling warmly as she made room for Lily. Claire looked embarrassed again. "She was supposed to stay with my sister outside. Apparently she had other plans." Lily climbed into the chair without hesitation. "I wanted to make sure you were nice." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "That seems like a fair reason." "You are nicer than I expected," Lily said matter-of-factly. "Most grown-ups act different when they meet new people." Ethan glanced toward Claire before answering. "Sometimes people are afraid they will not be accepted, so they try to become someone else." Lily considered that carefully while stirring the ice in her lemonade. "That sounds tiring." Claire laughed for the first time that evening, a gentle laugh that surprised even her. It had been months since something so small had made the weight on her shoulders feel lighter. Around them, the restaurant slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. Plates arrived carrying homemade lasagna, grilled salmon, warm bread brushed with butter, and fresh basil scattered across steaming pasta. Candlelight reflected against polished glasses while conversations blended into a comforting hum that reminded Ethan why he had always loved places like this. They were ordinary. There was something deeply comforting about ordinary. Extraordinary moments often arrived quietly inside ordinary evenings. Claire unfolded her napkin and finally looked directly at Ethan. "I should probably confess something before this goes any further." Ethan smiled. "I have a feeling I should do the same." She laughed again. "You first." He rested both hands around his glass of iced tea. "My coworkers arranged this without telling me who I was meeting. They said I needed to remember what having a social life looked like." Claire covered her face briefly, laughing harder than before. "My sister told me we were meeting one of her coworkers for dinner because someone cancelled. She conveniently forgot to mention it was actually a blind date." Ethan raised one eyebrow. "So we were both tricked." Claire nodded. "Apparently everyone around us believes they know what is best for us." They shared another smile, one that felt less awkward and more familiar. Across the room, Mike quietly lowered his menu and whispered, "I have never been happier to be the bad guy." Trevor grinned. "Do not celebrate yet. They are only talking." Back at the table, Lily was completely uninterested in the complicated feelings adults carried. She carefully broke her breadstick in half before sliding the larger piece onto Ethan's plate. "My mom says sharing makes food taste better." Ethan looked at the bread for a second before smiling with genuine gratitude. "Then I should probably share something too." He placed one of the warm dinner rolls onto Lily's plate. "Deal?" She nodded enthusiastically. Claire watched the exchange without saying a word. It was such a simple gesture that most people would never remember it tomorrow. Yet she noticed something different. Ethan never tried to impress Lily. He did not use a louder voice or exaggerated expressions the way some adults did around children. He simply treated her with the same quiet respect he offered everyone else. Children noticed those things. Parents noticed them even more. Their meals arrived moments later, filling the air with comforting aromas of roasted garlic, Parmesan cheese, and fresh herbs. Lily eagerly thanked the waitress before anyone reminded her to do so. Ethan noticed. "That was thoughtful," he said. Lily shrugged. "People like hearing thank you." Ethan nodded slowly. "They do." Claire looked down at her plate for a moment before speaking again. "She has taught me more about kindness than I have ever taught her." Ethan smiled gently. "Children usually do." Outside, the rain had become softer, almost musical against the restaurant windows. Passing headlights painted brief ribbons of light across the walls before disappearing into the Charleston night. The city seemed to slow down with the weather, inviting everyone inside to stay a little longer. Ethan found himself doing something he had not done with another adult in years. He stopped measuring time. Usually every dinner, every conversation, every errand existed inside a schedule built around responsibility. Pick up Noah. Finish laundry. Pack lunches. Fix the broken porch light. Sleep. Repeat. Tonight, for the first time in longer than he cared to admit, he simply listened. Claire spoke about teaching second grade at a neighborhood elementary school. She admitted she loved reading stories aloud because children always believed the ending could still change, even after the hardest chapters. Ethan shared stories about repairing boats at the marina and how the smell of salt water reminded him that every sunrise looked different from the ocean. Neither of them talked about heartbreak directly. Neither of them needed to. Their pauses carried enough truth. Lily finished coloring the paper menu the restaurant always gave children. She pushed it toward Ethan. Across the front she had drawn 3 stick figures beneath a bright yellow sun. One wore a blue shirt. One had long blonde hair. The smallest stood between them holding both of their hands. Ethan stared at the drawing longer than he expected. Before either adult could gently explain that it was only a child's imagination, Lily looked into his eyes with complete innocence and said, "Families do not always start at the beginning. Sometimes they find each other later. My teacher says that is still called home." Ethan felt something inside the carefully guarded walls of his heart shift ever so slightly, not like a storm breaking them apart, but like the first warm light entering a house that had been closed all winter. "I wonder sometimes whether life quietly arranges meetings long before people are ready to understand them," Ethan said as he carefully folded Lily's drawing and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Claire noticed the gesture immediately but chose not to comment. Some moments became more meaningful when left untouched, like fragile glass catching morning sunlight. Lily smiled proudly before taking another bite of her pasta, completely unaware that a simple drawing had become the most unexpected gift Ethan had received in years. The waitress returned to refill their glasses, thanking Lily for stacking her empty plate neatly near the edge of the table. "My mom says making someone else's job easier is another way of saying thank you," Lily explained. The waitress laughed warmly. "Your mom sounds very wise." Claire smiled modestly. "Most days we are both just figuring things out together." Ethan nodded with quiet understanding. "That may be the best kind of parenting." Claire looked at him with curiosity. "You really believe that?" "I do," Ethan answered. "Children are not looking for perfect parents. They are looking for safe ones." Those words settled gently over the table. Claire lowered her eyes for a moment, absorbing them more deeply than Ethan realized. She had spent years wondering if every mistake she made somehow failed Lily. Hearing someone describe safety instead of perfection felt like permission to breathe again. Outside, the rain finally stopped, leaving tiny beads of water clinging to the restaurant windows. Passing cars reflected across the glass while the evening sky slowly deepened into rich shades of navy blue. Somewhere in the distance a church bell chimed the half-hour, blending softly into the peaceful rhythm of downtown Charleston. Ethan leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. "Can I tell you something that my son says almost every morning?" Claire smiled. I would like that. Ethan laughed quietly. Before school, he checks the weather on my phone. Even if the forecast says sunshine all day, he still asks whether I packed an umbrella in the truck. Lily tilted her head. Why? Because after losing his mom, he worries about little things more than most children should. Ethan's smile remained gentle, but sadness briefly crossed his eyes like a passing cloud. He thinks if he prepares for every possible problem, maybe nothing else important will disappear. Claire reached for her glass without speaking. She recognized that kind of fear. It simply wore different clothes in every family. Lily sleeps with the hallway light on, she admitted after a long pause. Not because she is afraid of the dark. She says the light helps the house remember someone is awake if another hard day ever comes looking for us. Ethan looked toward Lily. She gave a tiny shrug as though that explanation required no further discussion. Children rarely realized how deeply their words reached adults. Sometimes they simply described their world exactly as they saw it. Ethan smiled kindly. That sounds very brave. It is not brave, Lily answered honestly. It just makes Mom sleep better. Claire blinked quickly, surprised by the quiet truth wrapped inside such a simple sentence. She had never told Lily about the nights she woke from anxious dreams or the evenings when silence inside the house felt heavier than the furniture around them. Somehow her daughter had noticed anyway. Ethan understood something in that moment that years in the Navy had taught him again and again. The people who loved us often carried burdens for us without ever asking permission. Sometimes the strongest hearts belonged to the smallest people in the room. Their meals had long since ended, but none of them seemed eager to leave. Coffee arrived for the adults while Lily happily accepted a small bowl of vanilla ice cream topped with fresh strawberries. She thanked the waitress once again before carefully eating one spoonful at a time. Ethan watched her smile and found himself remembering Noah at the same age, proudly insisting that dessert tasted better if you ate it slowly because happiness should never be rushed. The memory warmed him instead of hurting him this time. That surprised him. Claire noticed the distant look on his face. You were thinking about your son. Ethan nodded. He is spending tonight with my sister. She promised him homemade pizza and a movie marathon. He must adore his aunt. He does, Ethan replied. She reminds him that family is not measured by how many people live in one house. It is measured by who keeps showing up. Claire quietly repeated those words to herself. Who keeps showing up? They sounded simple enough to fit inside one sentence, yet strong enough to hold an entire lifetime together. Across the restaurant, Mike quietly checked his watch before whispering to Trevor. We should probably leave before Ethan figures out we have been spying on him for 2 hours. Trevor grinned. Look at him. He has not smiled that much since Noah won the elementary school science fair. They quietly paid their bill and slipped out through the front entrance without disturbing anyone. They had planned an awkward joke. Instead, they were leaving after witnessing something far gentler than they had ever expected. Back at the table, Lily finished the last strawberry, then looked thoughtfully between Ethan and Claire. Can I ask another question? Claire laughed softly. I do not think anyone could stop you. Lily folded her hands together exactly the way Ethan had done earlier. If two people both have broken hearts, can they help fix each other, or do they just become more broken? Neither adult answered immediately. The question lingered between them like the quiet echo of the church bell outside. Ethan finally looked at Claire before speaking with complete sincerity. I think healing starts when someone makes you feel safe enough to stop pretending that you are completely fine. Claire felt her eyes grow warm, but she smiled instead of looking away. For the first time in many years, she realized this evening no longer felt like an unexpected blind date arranged by well-meaning friends. It felt like the beginning of an honest conversation neither of them had known they desperately needed, and somewhere beyond the glowing restaurant windows, beneath a sky washed clean by spring rain, tomorrow seemed just a little less lonely than yesterday. I used to believe that the hardest part of starting over was finding the courage to say hello, Ethan said quietly as they stepped outside the restaurant. Now I think the hardest part is believing you deserve to hear someone say they are glad you came. Claire stood beside him beneath the striped awning while the cool evening air carried the fresh scent of rain and blooming jasmine from nearby window boxes. The sidewalk still shimmered beneath the streetlights, reflecting gold and silver across the old brick streets of Charleston. Traffic had thinned, replaced by the gentle sound of distant conversations and the occasional laughter of couples strolling toward the waterfront. Lily stretched her arms toward the sky, breathing deeply as though the rain had washed the whole city clean. "It smells happy," she declared. Claire smiled. "Only you would describe the weather that way." Ethan looked around thoughtfully. She might be right. For a moment none of them hurried to leave. The evening seemed reluctant to end, as though time itself understood that certain conversations deserved a slower goodbye. Claire glanced toward the parking lot where her sister Megan leaned against a small sport utility vehicle with folded arms and an unmistakably satisfied smile. The moment Megan noticed Claire looking her way, she lifted both hands in surrender before Claire could say a single word. "Do not even start," Megan called playfully. "You are smiling, and I have witnesses." Claire laughed despite herself. "You manipulated me." "Correct," Megan answered cheerfully. "And I would absolutely do it again." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "My coworkers deserve equal blame." "Then all of you need better hobbies," Claire replied with mock seriousness. Megan walked over and hugged Lily before turning to Ethan. "I owe you an apology. This was not exactly the introduction either of you deserved." Ethan smiled warmly. "It may not have been the introduction we expected, but I think it turned out better than any of us planned." Megan studied him for a second before nodding with quiet approval. "Claire has spent years putting everyone else first. I just wanted someone to remind her that she still deserves happiness too." Claire lowered her eyes, slightly embarrassed by the honesty. Ethan answered gently. "Sometimes the people who carry the most are the last ones to notice how tired they have become." Claire looked back at him, surprised once again by how naturally he seemed to understand feelings she rarely spoke aloud. Lily suddenly reached for Ethan's hand without hesitation. "Can we walk to the fountain before we go home?" she asked hopefully. Claire hesitated, checking the time. "Just for a few minutes." The small park across the street glowed beneath soft landscape lights. Water flowed peacefully through the center fountain, while benches circled neatly trimmed flower beds bursting with spring color. Children had long since gone home, leaving only a few couples enjoying the quiet evening. Ethan walked beside Lily while Claire and Megan followed several steps behind. Megan lowered her voice. "Well?" Claire sighed softly. "He is different." "Different good or different strange?" "Different safe." Megan smiled. "That is the first hopeful word I have heard you use in years." Claire watched Ethan kneel beside the fountain as Lily pointed excitedly at a family of ducks drifting through the shallow water. He listened to every word she said with complete attention, never checking his phone, never looking distracted, never pretending interest. It was simply who he was. Claire realized she had been watching for signs that kindness might only be an act. Instead, she found consistency, the quiet kind that could not be rehearsed for one evening. Ethan looked up toward the sky where the last clouds drifted away, revealing scattered stars above the historic rooftops. "My son likes counting stars," he said. "He insists there are always exactly 3 that appear before all the others." Lily looked upward immediately. "Maybe they are waiting for their friends." Ethan smiled. "That sounds like something Noah would say." "Can I meet him someday?" Lily asked innocently. Ethan paused for only a heartbeat before answering honestly. "If life gives us that opportunity, I think he would like you very much." Claire heard those words from a few feet away and felt an unexpected warmth settle over her heart. Ethan had not promised anything. He had not rushed ahead or made impossible plans. He had simply left room for hope without forcing it. That quiet balance felt rare. A cool breeze rustled through the oak trees, carrying the faint scent of salt from Charleston Harbor. Somewhere nearby, a street musician began playing a gentle acoustic melody that drifted through the park like a memory searching for its way home. People slowed their steps without realizing why. The music seemed to invite everyone to breathe a little deeper. Lily sat beside the fountain, watching the ripples dance beneath the lights. "Do you think people can find each other by accident?" she asked. Ethan sat beside her on the stone edge. "I think accidents introduce people." He looked toward Claire before continuing. "Everything important that happens after that comes from the choices they make." Claire met his eyes across the fountain. There was no pressure in his expression, no expectation, only quiet sincerity. She realized that for the first time since her marriage had ended, she was no longer measuring every conversation by how quickly it might disappoint her. Instead, she was simply present. Megan glanced discreetly at her watch. "Lily, we should let Mr. Brooks get home before Noah starts wondering where his dad disappeared to." Lily nodded obediently, then walked back toward Ethan. She wrapped her small arms around him in a quick goodbye hug that surprised both adults. Ethan returned the hug gently, careful and respectful, as though protecting something precious. "Good night, Captain Kind," Lily whispered with a grin. Ethan laughed softly. "I have never had that rank before." "You do now," she replied confidently. Claire smiled as they walked toward the parking lot. Before opening her car door, she turned back. "Thank you for tonight." Ethan slipped his hands into his jacket pockets. "No. Thank you for saying yes, even if either of us knew what we were agreeing to." They shared one final smile before driving in opposite directions through the quiet Charleston streets. Yet neither of them noticed that instead of feeling like they were leaving someone behind, it somehow felt as though they were both carrying a small piece of the same hopeful evening home with them, and somewhere inside the folded drawing resting safely in Ethan's jacket pocket, 3 simple stick figures waited patiently for the future to decide whether a child's picture had seen tomorrow before the adults ever could. "I have learned that the quietest mornings often reveal the loudest truths about the heart," Ethan thought as the first rays of sunlight stretched across Charleston Harbor. The marina slowly awakened around him with the familiar sounds that had become part of his everyday life. Seagulls called overhead, ropes tapped gently against wooden docks, and calm water reflected the pale orange sky like polished glass. Fishing boats rocked lazily with the tide while the scent of salt air mixed with fresh coffee drifting from the small harbor cafe. Ethan arrived every weekday before sunrise, not because anyone required it, but because those peaceful minutes reminded him that every new day began with another chance to choose gratitude instead of regret. He unlocked the maintenance shed, placed his worn lunchbox beside the workbench, and carefully unfolded the drawing Lily had given him the night before. 3 smiling stick figures stood beneath a bright yellow sun, their hands joined without hesitation. He looked at it for several quiet seconds before slipping it safely inside the drawer where he kept Noah's school artwork. Somehow the child's drawing already felt like it belonged beside the treasures his son had made over the years. "You have been smiling since 6 o'clock," Mike called as he walked across the dock carrying 2 cups of coffee. "That is making the rest of us suspicious." Ethan accepted the paper cup with a grateful nod. "Good morning to you too." Mike leaned against a piling and studied his friend with exaggerated seriousness. "Did you sleep at all, or were you busy writing poetry?" Ethan laughed softly. "Neither." Trevor joined them carrying a toolbox. "Then explain the smile." Ethan took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "Last night reminded me that not every unexpected moment becomes a bad memory." Mike exchanged a satisfied glance with Trevor. "That is the nicest thank you we have ever received for interfering in someone's personal life." Ethan shook his head, pretending to sound disappointed. "You two are impossible." "Correct," Trevor replied proudly. "But occasionally useful." The 3 men laughed together as the marina gradually filled with customers preparing their boats for weekend outings. Ethan inspected engines, tightened loose fittings, and greeted familiar faces with the same calm courtesy he offered everyone. Yet beneath his steady routine something had quietly shifted. The loneliness that usually accompanied his mornings felt lighter, as though someone had opened a window inside a room he had forgotten could hold fresh air. Across town, Claire stood in her second-grade classroom arranging colorful books along a reading shelf while soft morning sunlight poured through wide windows overlooking the playground. Tiny desks waited neatly in rows decorated with construction paper butterflies, handwritten spelling words, and cheerful drawings her students had proudly taped to the walls. She loved arriving early because classrooms carried a unique kind of hope before children filled them with questions and laughter. As she placed sharpened pencils into a small basket, another teacher, Rebecca Collins, leaned against the doorway with an amused smile. "Megan already called me." Claire closed her eyes dramatically. "Of course she did." Rebecca laughed. "Apparently your evening was much more successful than anyone expected." Claire tried to hide her smile, but failed almost instantly. "It was peaceful." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Peaceful is not the word people usually use after blind dates." Claire placed another stack of books on the shelf before answering quietly. "Maybe that is because most people are looking for excitement. I think I have spent enough years wishing for peace." Rebecca nodded with gentle understanding. "And?" Claire looked toward the empty playground outside. "He listened." "That is all?" "No," Claire admitted softly. "He listened without waiting for his turn to speak." Rebecca smiled knowingly. "That is much rarer." Before Claire could respond, the classroom door burst open and several students hurried inside, eager to show drawings they had finished at home. One little boy proudly carried a handmade birdhouse while another carefully protected a tiny potted sunflower from tipping over. Within moments the room transformed into its usual joyful chaos. Claire knelt beside each child, listening carefully to every story as though each one deserved the same attention. She realized she had admired exactly that quality in Ethan the evening before. Genuine attention could make ordinary people feel deeply valued. Meanwhile, Noah climbed into Ethan's pickup truck after school, dropping his backpack onto the seat with theatrical exhaustion. "Fifth grade is harder than the Navy," he declared confidently. Ethan smiled as he started the engine. "That sounds like a bold statement." Noah nodded. "Mrs. Peterson gave us fractions and a science project on the same day." Ethan laughed. "You survived both." Noah looked out the passenger window for a moment before speaking again. "Aunt Rachel said your dinner went well?" Ethan glanced at him. Briefly. "She tells you everything, does not she?" "Only because I ask." Noah grinned. "Was she nice?" Ethan answered honestly. "Yes." "Did she make you laugh?" "A few times." Noah smiled with quiet satisfaction before looking back toward the road. "Mom always said people who laugh together remember each other longer." Ethan felt his chest tighten gently, not with sadness this time, but with gratitude. His late wife's wisdom still found ways to guide them through ordinary afternoons. They stopped at their favorite neighborhood grocery store to pick up ingredients for homemade chili. As they walked through the produce section, Noah suddenly pointed toward a display of fresh strawberries. "Dad?" Ethan followed his son's gaze. Standing near the fruit display was Claire with Lily, both comparing different containers of berries while Lily carefully searched for the brightest red ones. Claire looked up almost at the same moment. Surprise crossed her face before slowly becoming a warm smile. Ethan returned the smile naturally, and for the first time either of them felt awkward about meeting unexpectedly. It felt less like coincidence, and more like the quiet beginning of something familiar. Lily spotted them a second later, and waved both hands enthusiastically. "Captain Kind!" she called across the aisle with complete delight. Several nearby shoppers turned curiously before smiling at the innocent greeting. Noah looked up at his father with puzzled amusement. "Captain Kind?" Ethan chuckled softly. "It is a long story." Noah grinned. "I think I want to hear this one. I have discovered that children rarely wait for permission to build bridges that adults spend years convincing themselves are impossible," Ethan thought as Lily hurried across the grocery aisle with a smile bright enough to make nearby shoppers smile with her. Claire followed at a calmer pace, laughing softly as she tried to catch up. Noah looked from Lily to his father with open curiosity, then back again, already sensing that this was more than an ordinary chance encounter. "So you really are Captain Kind," Lily said proudly, stopping in front of Ethan as though announcing an important discovery. Ethan placed one hand over his heart with playful seriousness. "Apparently I have been promoted without knowing it." Noah folded his arms dramatically. My dad never told me he had a secret title. Lily giggled. I gave it to him. Noah nodded as though that settled everything. Then I guess it is official. Claire shook her head with an apologetic smile. She has been talking about your dinner ever since we got home. Ethan glanced at Noah before answering. Someone at my house has been asking questions too. Noah extended his hand toward Claire with polite confidence. Hi. I am Noah Brooks. Claire smiled warmly as she shook his hand. It is very nice to meet you, Noah. Lily immediately stepped beside him. I am Lily. I like drawing, strawberry ice cream, ducks, and asking questions. Noah grinned. I like science, baseball, and pancakes. Lily tilted her head thoughtfully. I like pancakes too. Ethan and Claire exchanged amused glances. The conversation between the children flowed so naturally that neither adult felt the need to guide it. They simply walked together through the produce section while the children debated whether blueberries or strawberries belonged on pancakes. Around them the grocery store buzzed with ordinary Saturday afternoon life. Shopping carts rolled across polished floors. A bakery employee arranged fresh loaves of bread behind glass displays while the warm scent of cinnamon rolls drifted through the aisles. Soft country music played overhead, blending into the gentle rhythm of families preparing for another weekend together. Ethan reached for a bag of apples just as an elderly woman standing nearby struggled to lift a large sack of dog food from the bottom shelf into her shopping cart. Without hesitation, he placed his basket on the floor and stepped over. May I help you with that? He asked kindly. The woman smiled with visible relief. I would appreciate that very much. Ethan lifted the heavy bag carefully into her cart before making sure it was balanced securely. There you go. Thank you, young man, she said warmly. My golden retriever eats like he owns the place. Ethan laughed softly. Most good dogs do. The woman continued. Down the aisle smiling to herself. Ethan quietly picked up his basket again, as though nothing unusual had happened. He did not look around to see whether anyone had noticed. He simply returned to Claire and the children, asking Noah whether they still needed onions for the chili. Claire watched the entire exchange without saying a word. There had been no performance, no expectation of praise, no dramatic gesture. Ethan had simply seen someone who needed help and responded before anyone else had even realized there was a problem. Lily noticed too. She gently tugged on Claire's sleeve. Mom. Yes, sweetheart? Lily lowered her voice as though sharing an important secret. Captain Kind helps people even when nobody is clapping. Claire looked toward Ethan, who was now comparing tomatoes with Noah while discussing which ones would taste best in homemade chili. A quiet warmth settled inside her chest. Children often recognized character before adults found the words to describe it. They continued shopping together almost without planning to. Claire needed milk and cereal. Ethan needed fresh vegetables and ground beef. The children volunteered to push one shopping cart together, taking the responsibility with complete seriousness. Noah carefully steered while Lily reminded him every few feet not to bump into displays. Their teamwork drew quiet smiles from passing customers. As they reached the dairy section, a young father stood nearby trying to comfort a toddler who had become overwhelmed after dropping a carton of eggs onto the floor. The little girl looked frightened, convinced she had ruined everything. Before the embarrassed father could apologize to the employee rushing over with cleaning supplies, Ethan knelt beside the child, keeping a respectful distance. Can I tell you something? He asked gently. The little girl nodded through watery eyes. When my son was about your age, he accidentally dropped an entire gallon of milk in another grocery store. I thought the floor had turned into a lake. Noah laughed from behind the cart. I remember that story. Ethan smiled. Do you know what happened next? The little girl sniffled. What? Someone helped us clean it up. Then they reminded us that accidents happen much faster than kindness, but kindness usually lasts longer. The child looked at the broken eggs one more time before slowly smiling. The employee cleaning the mess looked up appreciatively. She is going to be just fine. The grateful father quietly thanked Ethan before leading his daughter away. Ethan simply nodded and returned to his shopping. Claire found herself watching him again, noticing the same pattern repeating itself. He never tried to become the center of any moment. He simply left every place a little calmer than he had found it. That quiet consistency impressed her more than grand speeches ever could. After paying for their groceries, they stepped outside into the warm afternoon sunshine. The parking lot shimmered beneath a bright blue South Carolina sky while a gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass from nearby neighborhoods. Noah looked toward Ethan. "Dad, can Lily and Miss Claire come to the park with us? We were going to throw the baseball anyway." Before Ethan could answer, Claire looked down at Lily, whose hopeful eyes had already revealed her answer. Claire smiled softly. "We have nowhere else we need to be this afternoon." Ethan looked at both children, then back at Claire. "I think that sounds like a pretty good plan." Noah and Lily exchanged excited smiles before racing carefully toward the small community park beside the grocery store, their laughter rising above the quiet afternoon like the first notes of a song that somehow already felt familiar to everyone who had begun listening. "I have noticed that trust rarely arrives all at once. It usually grows one ordinary moment at a time until one day you realize it has quietly become part of your life," Ethan thought as he carried 2 baseball gloves and a well-worn ball across the small community park. The afternoon sun rested comfortably above the oak trees, casting long patches of shade over the green grass while children laughed from the nearby playground. The scent of fresh-cut grass drifted through the warm breeze, mixing with the faint sweetness of blooming magnolias that lined the walking path. Families spread picnic blankets beneath the trees, cyclists rolled past at an easy pace, and somewhere beyond the playground a golden retriever chased a tennis ball with endless enthusiasm. It was the kind of peaceful Saturday that never made the news but quietly became the memories people treasured years later. Noah tossed his backpack onto a nearby bench and pulled on his baseball glove with practiced confidence. "Ready?" he asked, spinning the ball in his hand. Lily looked at the oversized glove Ethan had brought for her and smiled uncertainly. "I have never played before." Noah grinned. "That is okay. Neither had I once." Ethan knelt beside Lily and adjusted the glove around her small hand. "There is no score today," he said gently. "We are only learning." Lily nodded, instantly relaxing. Claire watched from a nearby bench as Ethan patiently showed Lily how to open the glove and keep her eyes on the ball instead of closing them before each catch. He never rushed her. Every missed throw became another chance to smile instead of another reason to feel embarrassed. "You are getting closer every time," he encouraged after the ball bounced gently past her again. Lily laughed instead of becoming frustrated. "I almost caught it." "You absolutely did almost catch it," Ethan replied warmly. "That means the next one might stay inside the glove." Noah tossed another easy throw. This time the ball landed softly inside the pocket. Lily stared at her glove in complete surprise before raising both hands into the air. "I did it!" Noah clapped enthusiastically. "See? I told you!" Claire felt herself smiling without even realizing it. She had watched teachers encourage children. She had watched coaches encourage children. But there was something different about Ethan. He celebrated effort before success. Somehow that made success feel even more meaningful when it arrived. After several more throws, Noah suggested they take turns hitting soft ground balls across the grass. Ethan rolled the ball gently while the children chased after it together, laughing every time one of them missed. Their laughter floated across the park, light and effortless. Claire leaned back against the wooden bench, closing her eyes for just a moment as the gentle breeze brushed across her face. It had been a long time since she had sat somewhere without constantly checking the clock or worrying about the next responsibility waiting at home. Ethan quietly sat beside her once the children became absorbed in their game. For several moments neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Finally Claire smiled. "I forgot afternoons could feel this peaceful." Ethan followed the children's laughter with his eyes. "Sometimes peace has been there all along. We are simply too tired to notice it." Claire looked at him thoughtfully. "You always seem to know the right thing to say." Ethan smiled modestly. Not always. I just had enough years in the Navy to learn that people usually need understanding more than advice. Before Claire could answer, a small bright red rubber ball from another group of children bounced unexpectedly toward the walking path beside the park. Without thinking, Lily ran after it, laughing as it rolled a little farther each time she almost reached it. Claire immediately stood. Lily! At that same moment Ethan noticed a cyclist approaching the path from the opposite direction, coasting downhill with limited room to stop quickly. His voice remained calm but clear. Lily, sweetheart, stop right there. Something about his steady tone made Lily freeze exactly where she was. The cyclist slowed immediately, smiling apologetically as he carefully passed in front of her before bringing his bicycle to a complete stop a few yards away. Thank you, he called kindly. I appreciate that. Ethan nodded with a grateful smile. Have a good ride. The cyclist waved before continuing along the trail. Ethan walked over to Lily, gently picked up the red ball, and handed it back to the little boy who had been chasing it from across the field. Then he crouched beside Lily until they were eye level. His expression remained calm. Can I tell you why I asked you to stop? Lily nodded quietly. Sometimes our eyes become so focused on what we are chasing that we forget to notice what else is moving around us. Lily listened carefully. I was only looking at the ball. I know, Ethan answered gently. And that is why I wanted to help. There was no scolding in his voice. No fear. Only patient guidance. Lily looked down for a moment before slipping her small hand into his. Thank you for reminding me. Ethan smiled. That is what grown-ups are supposed to do. Claire had watched the entire moment unfold from only a few steps away. Her heart had raced for only an instant, but what stayed with her afterward was not fear. It was the remarkable calm Ethan had brought into the situation. He had not shouted. He had not panicked. He had simply created enough stillness for everyone to make a safe choice. Noah walked over carrying the baseball glove beneath one arm. Dad always says calm people help other people think clearly. Lily looked up at Noah with admiration. Your dad teaches without making people feel bad. Noah smiled proudly. He teaches me like that every day. Claire felt emotion quietly rise inside her chest. She realized she had just witnessed something far more valuable than a baseball lesson. She had seen the kind of father who protected children not only with careful actions but also with gentle words that preserved their confidence. As the four of them walked back toward the bench together beneath the warm afternoon sun, Lily reached for Ethan's hand again without hesitation, and this time she did not let go until they reached the picnic table, as though somewhere deep inside her young heart she had already begun recognizing a kind of safety she had been quietly hoping to find. I have come to believe that healing does not announce itself with fireworks. It arrives quietly on ordinary afternoons when someone notices that they are smiling without remembering exactly when it began, Claire thought as the four of them settled beneath the shade of an old live oak overlooking the park. Sunlight filtered through the broad branches, scattering dancing patches of light across the picnic table, while a gentle breeze carried the distant laughter of children playing on swings. Somewhere nearby, an ice cream truck rolled slowly through the neighborhood, its cheerful melody floating across the open field like a familiar childhood memory. Noah reached into the cooler Ethan had packed that morning and held up 2 bottles of lemonade. Dad always brings extra, he said with a grin. He says somebody usually forgets theirs. Ethan shrugged with a modest smile. It has happened enough times to become a habit. Lily accepted the bottle with both hands. Thank you, Captain Kind. Noah laughed. I think that nickname is going to stay forever. Ethan smiled as he twisted open his own bottle. There are much worse things to be called. Claire watched the easy exchange between them. It felt remarkably natural, as though the children had skipped past the awkwardness that adults often carried into every new relationship. They were not wondering whether this friendship made sense or whether tomorrow would be different. They were simply enjoying the afternoon because it was there. Sometimes children accepted blessings long before adults trusted them. After finishing their drinks, Noah reached into his backpack and carefully pulled out a small telescope no longer than his forearm. I bring this everywhere. he explained proudly. Lily's eyes widened. Even during the daytime? Noah nodded. You cannot see stars now, but you can still see birds and boats, and the moon if it is in the right place. Ethan smiled. He saved his allowance for almost a year to buy it. Noah blushed slightly. Dad helped me learn how to use it. Lily looked through the telescope with complete fascination, slowly turning it toward the harbor where white sailboats drifted across the sparkling water. Everything looks closer, she whispered. Ethan looked toward Claire. Sometimes that is all people need. A different way of looking. Claire smiled thoughtfully. You have a habit of turning simple moments into life lessons. Ethan laughed softly. Occupational hazard of raising a curious son. Noah looked up from adjusting the telescope. Actually, Dad says I teach him just as much. Claire noticed the sincerity in his voice. There was no rehearsed admiration, only the quiet confidence of a child who knew he had always been heard. It made her wonder how many evenings Ethan had spent answering endless questions instead of rushing through bedtime routines. She imagined conversations about planets, fishing boats, weather patterns, and dreams that only children dared describe with complete honesty. Those invisible hours shaped a father more than anyone else would ever see. Lily lowered the telescope and suddenly asked Noah, Do you ever miss your mom? Noah became quiet for a moment, looking toward the calm water beyond the trees. Ethan did not interrupt. He simply waited. Finally Noah answered gently, Every day. Lily looked down at her shoes. Me too. Claire reached instinctively toward her daughter, but Lily continued speaking before she could. Not because she went to heaven. She looked toward Ethan and Noah with surprising maturity. I miss having somebody to call Dad. Silence settled around the picnic table. Even the cheerful music from the ice cream trucks seemed farther away now. Claire felt her heart tighten, not because she had never heard those words before, but because this time they had been spoken aloud in front of someone new. Ethan looked at Lily with quiet compassion. He did not rush to fill the silence. He simply respected it. After a few moments he spoke gently. It is okay to miss something you have never really had. Lily blinked, surprised. Ethan continued softly. Our hearts sometimes know what they need long before life gives it to us. Claire lowered her eyes as emotion quietly warmed them. There was no pity in Ethan's voice. No attempt to rescue anyone with perfect answers. He simply made space for feelings that most people tried to avoid. Noah reached over and nudged Lily's shoulder lightly. You can borrow my dad for baseball practice anytime. Lily laughed through the heaviness of the moment. Really? Sure, Noah replied. He teaches patience better than anybody. Ethan smiled at his son. Thank you for volunteering me. You were going to say yes anyway. Noah answered confidently. Ethan laughed. You know me too well. Claire watched father and son exchange that familiar look of effortless understanding. It was not dramatic. It was built from thousands of ordinary mornings, shared dinners, homework sessions, and quiet conversations. Suddenly she understood what had been drawing her toward Ethan from the very beginning. It was not his Navy background. It was not his kindness alone. It was the consistency of his character. He was the same person whether anyone was watching or not. The afternoon slowly drifted toward early evening as long golden shadows stretched across the grass. Families began packing picnic baskets while children reluctantly left the playground one by one. A flock of white birds crossed the bright blue sky, their graceful formation reflecting across the calm harbor beyond the trees. Ethan glanced at his watch. We should probably head home before dinner gets too late. Noah nodded, gathering the baseball gloves and telescope. Lily looked disappointed but smiled anyway. Can we all do this again? Before either adult could answer, Noah spoke first. I hope so. Claire looked toward Ethan. Their eyes met for only a second, yet in that brief glance both silently recognized the same truth. None of them wanted this to be the last ordinary Saturday they shared. Sometimes the strongest promises were never spoken aloud. They simply began growing quietly inside hearts that had finally found a reason to hope again. I once believed that keeping a promise meant never changing your course, Ethan thought as he steered his pickup through the quiet streets of Charleston with Noah beside him. Now I wonder if the deepest promises are not about standing still at all, but about having the courage to keep loving even after life changes everything around you. The late afternoon sunlight poured through the windshield, painting warm bands of gold across the dashboard, while the radio played an old acoustic song quietly enough to leave room for comfortable silence. Noah rested his elbow against the passenger door, watching familiar neighborhoods pass by. After several peaceful minutes he spoke without taking his eyes off the road ahead. "Dad?" Ethan glanced over briefly. "Yes, buddy?" Noah smiled thoughtfully. "I liked today." Ethan returned the smile. "So did I." Noah hesitated before asking the question that had clearly been waiting inside his heart. "Do you think we will see Claire and Lily again?" Ethan kept both hands on the steering wheel, choosing his words carefully. "I hope so." Noah nodded slowly. "I hope so too." Neither of them spoke again until they pulled into the driveway of their small white house with its weathered front porch and carefully trimmed flower beds that Ethan and Noah had planted together every spring since Emily's passing. The house was modest, but every room carried reminders that love had once filled every corner and had never truly left. Inside, the familiar scent of onions, tomatoes, and herbs soon filled the kitchen as father and son prepared the homemade chili they had planned earlier that day. Noah carefully chopped celery while Ethan stirred the simmering pot with slow, practiced movements. They worked side by side with the easy rhythm that only years of shared routines could create. Finally Noah broke the comfortable silence again. "Can I ask you something important?" Ethan smiled. "You usually do." Noah rested the knife safely on the cutting board before turning toward his father. "Are you afraid?" Ethan looked at him with quiet curiosity. "Afraid of what?" "Of being happy again." The wooden spoon stopped moving for just a moment. Steam continued rising gently from the pot while the kitchen clock ticked softly on the wall. Ethan lowered the heat before leaning against the counter. "Why would you ask me that?" Noah shrugged gently. "Because every time something good starts happening, you look happy for a little while. Then you become careful again." Ethan lowered his eyes, surprised by how accurately his son had described something he had never admitted aloud. Children noticed patterns adults hoped remained invisible. He pulled out one of the kitchen chairs and sat down across from Noah. "There is something I have never really explained," he began quietly. Noah listened without interrupting. "The last promise I made to your mom was in the hospital." Ethan paused, his voice remaining steady even as old memories returned with remarkable clarity. "She held my hand and asked me to take care of you. She asked me to make sure you always felt loved, always felt safe, and never doubted that you came before everything else." Noah nodded slowly, remembering pieces of that difficult time through the soft blur of childhood. Ethan continued. "After she was gone, I kept thinking that if I ever let someone new into our lives, I might somehow fail that promise. I worried that I could make a mistake. I worried someone might hurt you. I worried I might not recognize it until it was too late." Noah looked at his father with gentle understanding beyond his years. "So you stopped trying?" Ethan smiled sadly. "Yes." Silence settled between them again, filled only by the quiet bubbling of dinner on the stove. Outside, the evening breeze stirred the wind chimes hanging from the porch, sending soft notes drifting through the open kitchen window. Noah finally leaned forward. "Dad, can I tell you something now?" Ethan nodded. "Always." Noah folded his hands together exactly the way his father often did when thinking carefully. "I remember Mom too." Ethan smiled warmly. "I know you do. She used to tell me that love is not like pie." Ethan blinked with gentle surprise before laughing softly. "That sounds exactly like her." Noah grinned. "She said if you share pie with more people, everybody gets a smaller piece. But love is different. The more people you give it to, the bigger it grows." Ethan felt his eyes grow warm as memories of Emily's bright smile returned with unexpected clarity. He could almost hear her saying those exact words while laughing in this very kitchen years earlier. Noah continued quietly. I do not think Mom wanted you to be lonely forever. Ethan looked down at his hands for a long moment before answering. Maybe I have been protecting the wrong promise. Noah stood, walked around the table, and wrapped his arms around his father in a brief but heartfelt hug. You never broke your promise, he whispered. You took care of me every single day. Ethan closed his eyes for just a moment, holding his son close. Thank you. After dinner, Noah disappeared upstairs to finish homework while Ethan carried 2 bowls to the sink. As he washed the dishes, his phone buzzed softly on the kitchen counter. He dried his hands before looking at the screen. A message from Claire appeared, simple and unhurried. Thank you again for today. Lily is already asking whether Captain Kind remembers to eat enough vegetables. Ethan laughed quietly to himself before typing back. Please tell her Captain Kind finished an entire bowl of homemade chili and followed orders by eating every vegetable. A few seconds later another message appeared. Lily says that means you passed another test. Ethan smiled, shaking his head with amused disbelief. He looked through the window toward the peaceful evening sky where the first stars had begun appearing one by one above the quiet neighborhood. Somewhere inside the house Noah was humming while working on homework. Somewhere across town Lily was probably telling Claire another impossible question before bedtime. Ethan slipped his phone into his pocket and stood quietly beneath the fading light, realizing that for the first time in many years, tomorrow no longer felt like another day he simply needed to survive. It felt like a day he was genuinely looking forward to living. I have learned that hope is both beautiful and frightening because the moment you begin believing in it again, you also remember what it feels like to lose it, Claire thought as she stood quietly on her back porch after Lily had fallen asleep. The neighborhood rested beneath a clear South Carolina sky filled with scattered stars, while the gentle chorus of crickets drifted across neatly kept backyards. Warm porch lights glowed from nearby homes where families finished dinners, folded laundry, and settled into the ordinary routines that quietly stitched lives together. Claire wrapped a light sweater around her shoulders and cradled a warm mug of chamomile tea between both hands. The evening breeze carried the faint scent of freshly mowed lawns and blooming jasmine, reminding her of spring evenings long before life had become so carefully organized around survival instead of joy. Inside the house, Lily slept peacefully with one arm wrapped around her favorite stuffed rabbit, her school backpack already packed neatly beside the bedroom door for Monday morning. Claire watched through the window for a moment before returning to the porch swing. She realized she had smiled more during the past 2 days than she had during entire months before meeting Ethan. That thought brought comfort, but it also brought fear. She had rebuilt her life slowly after disappointment, carefully arranging every routine so that neither she nor Lily would depend on anyone who might someday disappear. Safety had become predictable. Predictability had become survival. Then one quiet evening had gently interrupted everything she believed she had already accepted. The screen door opened softly behind her. Megan stepped onto the porch carrying a small plate with 2 slices of homemade apple pie. I figured tea deserved company, she said with an affectionate smile. Claire laughed quietly. You always know when I am thinking too much. Megan handed her one of the plates before settling into the swing beside her. For several minutes they simply ate in comfortable silence while the porch swing creaked gently beneath them. Finally Megan spoke. You are scared. Claire looked toward the dark street instead of answering immediately. Is it that obvious? Megan nodded. Only because I know you. Claire sighed softly. I spent years convincing myself that Lily and I were enough. And you are enough, Megan answered gently. But enough and complete are not always the same thing. Claire lowered her eyes, absorbing those words. Megan continued quietly. You are not afraid that Ethan is a good man. You are afraid that he actually is. Claire looked at her sister with surprised honesty. Because if he really is that kind, then your heart has to make room for possibilities you promise yourself you would never need again. Claire smiled sadly. Exactly. She looked toward the stars before continuing. I watched him with Lily today. He never once tried to impress her. He simply cared about her without asking for anything back. That is what frightened me. Megan reached over and gently squeezed her sister's hand. Good people often frighten wounded hearts because they remind us what we almost stopped believing existed. Across town, Ethan sat on his own front porch after Noah had gone to bed, holding a small wooden memory box across his knees. The old box contained photographs, handwritten birthday cards, ticket stubs from family vacations, Noah's first crayon drawing, and dozens of small reminders that love never truly disappeared simply because someone was no longer physically present. He slowly lifted one photograph from the stack. Emily stood barefoot on a beach, laughing while holding toddler Noah above the incoming waves. The afternoon sun surrounded her like a halo of warm light. Ethan smiled gently instead of looking away. "I miss you," he whispered into the quiet night. The words no longer carried only sorrow. They carried gratitude too. He carefully placed the photograph back into the box before noticing another folded piece of paper resting beneath it. Curious, he unfolded it slowly. It was one of Emily's old grocery lists written in her familiar handwriting. At the bottom, beneath milk, bread, apples, and pasta, she had added one final note meant only for herself. "Do not forget that Noah needs a happy father more than a perfect one." Ethan stared at those words as though reading them for the first time. His throat tightened gently. Of all the reminders she could have unknowingly left behind, this was the one he needed most. He closed the memory box carefully and looked toward the quiet street where porch lights glowed softly beneath the stars. Perhaps he had spent years trying so hard to avoid making mistakes that he had accidentally avoided allowing new blessings to enter their lives as well. The following afternoon, Claire volunteered at the elementary school library where Lily loved helping organize returned books. The library smelled of polished wood, fresh paper, and colorful imagination. Children wandered happily between shelves searching for stories about dinosaurs, astronauts, princesses, inventors, and adventures waiting just beyond the next page. Lily carefully placed picture books into alphabetical order while humming quietly to herself. A few minutes later, the front door opened, and Noah stepped inside carrying a cardboard box nearly as wide as his arms. Ethan followed close behind. Claire looked up in surprise. Ethan smiled warmly. "The marina sponsors a reading program every spring. We are donating books for the school." Noah set the box gently onto the librarian's desk. "Dad said every child deserves a chance to discover one book that changes how they see the world." Lily hurried over with delighted eyes. "Can I help?" "We were hoping you would," Noah answered with a grin. Soon the two children were carefully unpacking brand new books, excitedly reading every title aloud before placing them onto the cart. Claire watched Ethan quietly speaking with the librarian, never mentioning that he had organized the donation himself. There was no announcement, no search for recognition, only another simple act of kindness carried out as naturally as breathing. The librarian smiled gratefully. "These will make a difference for so many children." Ethan simply nodded. "Books changed my life when I was young. I figured it was time to return the favor." Claire felt something inside her settle with peaceful certainty. She had spent weeks wondering whether the kindness she kept seeing was simply the best version of someone she barely knew. Instead, she was discovering that every ordinary day revealed exactly the same man. Quiet. Steady. Humble. Present. As Ethan glanced across the library and their eyes met between rows of colorful books, neither of them needed to say anything. Sometimes trust was built not through grand declarations but through watching the same quiet goodness appear again and again until doubt simply became too small to hold on to anymore. I have learned that misunderstandings rarely begin with unkind people. They begin when fear quietly finishes a conversation before truth has the chance to speak, Ethan thought as he finished locking the storage room at the marina late Thursday afternoon. The sky above Charleston had turned a soft gray, and a light drizzle tapped gently against the dock while fishing boats rocked quietly with the rising tide. The familiar scent of salt water and rain filled the air, but for the first time in several weeks Ethan felt strangely unsettled. He could not explain why. Nothing had gone wrong. Work had been steady. Noah was doing well in school. Yet somewhere deep inside, an old instinct kept reminding him that happiness sometimes disappeared just when people finally trusted it enough to relax. He picked up his phone to send Claire a quick message asking whether she and Lily might like to join him and Noah for a Saturday picnic at the Botanical Gardens. Before he could type a single word, the screen lit up with a message from Megan. It simply read, "Claire is having a difficult afternoon. Please give her a little time." Ethan looked at the message for several seconds before slipping the phone back into his pocket. He respected boundaries. If Claire needed space, he would gladly give it. Across town, Claire sat alone in the empty classroom after every student had gone home. Rain traced quiet paths across the tall windows while scattered worksheets rested neatly on her desk, forgotten for the moment. Earlier that afternoon, she had received an unexpected visit from her former mother-in-law, Diane Sullivan. The older woman had stopped by to bring Lily a birthday card several weeks early, but the conversation that followed lingered heavily inside Claire's heart long after Diane had left. "Lily seems very attached to that gentleman," Diane had said carefully. Claire smiled politely. "His name is Ethan." Diane nodded. "He appears to be a wonderful man." She paused before continuing more softly. "Just promise me one thing." Claire looked at her with quiet curiosity. "What is that?" Diane folded her hands together. "Please do not let Lily become too attached unless you know with complete certainty that he plans to stay forever. Children survive disappointment, but it changes them." Claire had not answered immediately because she understood the love hidden beneath those words. Diane was not criticizing Ethan. She was trying to protect her granddaughter from another goodbye. Yet the conversation reopened fears Claire thought she had finally begun overcoming. As the rain continued outside, Claire looked toward the framed photograph of Lily sitting on her desk. She whispered almost to herself, "What if I am wrong?" At nearly the same moment, Ethan drove across town to pick up Noah from baseball practice. The rain had become steadier now, covering the windshield with gentle patterns that the wipers quietly swept away. Noah climbed into the truck carrying his equipment bag and immediately noticed his father's thoughtful expression. "Everything okay?" Ethan smiled reassuringly. "Just thinking." Noah nodded. "About Miss Claire?" Ethan laughed softly. "Am I that predictable?" Noah grinned. "Only to me." Ethan started the truck before answering honestly. "I think she may need some space today." Noah looked out the rain-covered window for a moment. "Sometimes people ask for space because they are scared of losing something important." Ethan glanced toward him with quiet surprise. "Where did you learn that?" Noah shrugged. "From watching you." Ethan smiled sadly, recognizing more truth than he expected inside those simple words. The next afternoon the rain finally cleared, leaving the city washed clean beneath bright sunshine. Ethan stopped by the elementary school to drop off several repaired bookshelves the Marina workshop had volunteered to restore for the library. As he carried the final shelf through the hallway, he slowed instinctively after hearing familiar voices drifting from the teacher's lounge around the corner. He had no intention of listening, but one sentence stopped him before he could continue walking. "I do not know if I can let this become serious," Claire's voice said quietly. "Lily already cares about him so much." Rebecca answered gently. "Do you care about him?" A long silence followed before Claire finally whispered, "More than I wanted to." Ethan stood perfectly still, waiting for the rest of her answer. Claire continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "That is exactly why I think I should step back before Lily gets hurt if this does not work." Ethan lowered his eyes. He did not stay long enough to hear Rebecca respond. Quietly and without making a sound, he carried the last bookshelf into the library, thanked the librarian for everything, and left through the side entrance before Claire ever realized he had been there. During the drive home his thoughts remained remarkably calm. There was no anger inside him. Only the familiar ache of someone who believed he finally understood. Claire was choosing what she believed would protect her daughter. Ethan respected that more than he could express. By the time he reached home, his decision had already settled quietly inside his heart. That evening, after Noah had gone upstairs to shower, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper in front of him. He stared at it for several minutes before finally beginning to write. Dear Claire, thank you for reminding me that hope still exists. You and Lily brought more light into our lives than you may ever realize. I also understand that protecting your daughter will always come first. I respect that completely because I would make the same choice for Noah. Please do not worry about explaining anything. Sometimes caring for someone means making the difficult decision easier for them. I sincerely hope you both find every happiness life has waiting for you. Ethan folded the letter carefully but did not place it inside an envelope. Instead, he set it quietly on the kitchen counter beside the drawing Lily had given him on the night they first met. Upstairs, Noah called down cheerfully, asking whether they were still going fishing on Saturday morning. Ethan looked toward the ceiling and answered with the same gentle warmth he always used. Of course we are, buddy. Yet after the house became quiet again, he stood alone by the window watching the last light disappear beyond the Charleston rooftops, believing with quiet dignity that sometimes the kindest thing a man could do was step away before the people he cared about ever had to ask him to. The greatest mistakes are often born from love that becomes afraid to speak, Claire realized the moment she walked into the library the next morning and found the restored bookshelves already standing neatly against the wall. She smiled instinctively, expecting to see Ethan somewhere among the stacks of children's books, quietly tightening the last screw or carrying another box without asking for recognition. Instead, the librarian looked up with a warm smile. You just missed him, she said. He dropped these off yesterday afternoon. Such a thoughtful man. Claire felt a strange heaviness settle inside her chest. Yesterday? The librarian nodded. He seemed in a hurry. He thanked everyone, wished us well, and left before anyone could even offer him coffee. Claire forced a small smile, but something inside her whispered that this was not like Ethan. He never hurried away from conversations unless he believed someone else needed peace more than he needed company. She thanked the librarian and slowly walked toward the reading corner where Lily and Noah had unpacked books together only a day before. A colorful bookmark rested on one of the shelves. Tucked beneath it was a folded sheet of paper with familiar handwriting. Her breath caught. She unfolded it carefully. Every word Ethan had written the night before stared back at her with heartbreaking kindness. He had thanked her. He had respected her decision. He had quietly stepped away without asking for an explanation. Claire read the letter twice before lowering it with trembling hands. Her eyes filled with tears, not because he had blamed her, but because he had not blamed her at all. That made the misunderstanding hurt even more. Rebecca entered the library carrying a stack of folders and immediately noticed Claire's expression. What happened? Claire handed her the letter without speaking. Rebecca read it silently, then looked back at her with gentle disbelief. Claire, he heard part of our conversation, did he not? Claire slowly nodded as realization settled over her. He left before hearing the rest. Rebecca sighed softly. You were trying to explain your fear, not reject him. Claire covered her face for a brief moment. He thinks I chose to walk away. Rebecca placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Then go tell him the truth before silence becomes something neither of you can undo. Claire did not hesitate another second. She hurried from the school, calling Megan as she crossed the parking lot. Do you know where Ethan might be? Megan answered immediately. Rachel told me he promised Noah they would spend the afternoon fishing at Harbor Point Pier. Claire thanked her, climbed into her car, and drove toward the waterfront with Lily buckled safely in the back seat. The afternoon sky had turned cloudy again, and a gentle rain began falling across Charleston, covering the windshield with soft silver drops. Lily noticed the worried expression on her mother's face. Mom? Claire looked into the rearview mirror. Yes, sweetheart? Are we going to see Captain Kind? Claire smiled through damp eyes. I hope so. Lily folded her small hands together. Then we should hurry before he thinks nobody wants him anymore. Those simple words settled heavily inside Claire's heart. 20 minutes later they arrived at Harbor Point Pier. Fishing boats swayed gently beneath the gray sky while gulls circled lazily above the quiet water. Claire hurried along the wooden boards, looking from one end of the pier to the other. Finally she saw Ethan standing beside Noah near the railing, patiently helping him untangle a fishing line. For one brief moment she simply watched. Even here, believing he had lost something precious, Ethan still focused entirely on his son. That quiet dignity almost broke her heart. Ethan looked up after hearing footsteps. Surprise crossed his face as he saw Claire approaching. Before either adult could speak, Lily slipped free from her mother's hand and ran the last few yards across the pier. Ethan instinctively knelt, opening his arms just enough for her to stop safely in front of him. She looked directly into his eyes, her own already shining with tears she did not fully understand. "Captain Kind," she whispered, breathing hard from running. Ethan smiled gently. "Hi, sweetheart." Lily reached for both of his hands and held them tightly. The rain tapped softly against the wooden pier. The harbor became strangely quiet. Even Noah and Claire remained completely still. Lily searched Ethan's face with the complete honesty only a child could offer. "Mom said people leave because they get scared sometimes." Ethan looked toward Claire for only a second before returning his attention to Lily. She tightened her little fingers around his hands and asked the same question that had changed everything on the night they first met. "Will you stay?" Time seemed to stop. Ethan closed his eyes briefly as emotion washed over him. Claire stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "Please do not answer. Until you hear the whole truth." Ethan slowly stood, still holding Lily's hand. Claire took a deep breath. "You heard my fear, but you did not hear my heart. I was never trying to leave you. I was terrified of losing you after finally realizing how much you already meant to us. I thought protecting Lily meant guarding my heart. Instead, I almost taught her that fear should always make our decisions." Ethan looked quietly at the letter still folded in Claire's hand. She held it out to him. "You respected me enough to walk away. Please respect me enough now to let me ask you to stay." Noah looked from his father to Claire, then smiled softly as though he had been waiting for this moment all along. Ethan glanced down at Lily, whose hopeful eyes never left his face. Then he looked back at Claire, and beneath the gentle rain falling across the quiet harbor, the silence between them no longer felt like goodbye. It felt like two wounded hearts finally finding the courage to choose hope instead of fear. The most beautiful endings are rarely the loudest ones. They arrive in quiet moments when frightened hearts finally choose trust over fear, and ordinary people discover that the family they were praying for had been walking toward them all along. Ethan looked at Claire for a long moment, while the gentle rain continued to fall across Harbor Point Pier. Water rippled softly against the wooden pilings below, gulls drifted silently above the harbor, and the entire world seemed to slow just enough to let one honest answer change four lives forever. He looked down at Lily, whose tiny hands were still wrapped around his. Then he glanced toward Noah, whose hopeful smile carried the same quiet courage his mother had always admired. Finally, Ethan spoke with the calm sincerity that had become the foundation of every important promise he had ever made. "Yes," he said softly. "I will stay, as long as we promise each other something." Claire stepped a little closer. "Anything." Ethan smiled gently. No more letting fear finish conversations before love has a chance to speak. Claire nodded as tears mixed with the light rain on her cheeks. "I promise." Noah walked forward first, giving his father a quick hug before smiling at Lily. "Looks like Captain Kind is officially staying." Lily laughed through happy tears before hugging Ethan again, this time with the complete confidence of a child who finally believed the answer she had hoped for was real. Claire quietly stepped beside them, and without a single dramatic gesture, Ethan reached for her hand. She slipped her fingers into his, and neither of them hurried to let go. Sometimes the strongest promises needed nothing more than two hands choosing to remain together. The months that followed did not unfold like a fairy tale. They unfolded like real life, and somehow that made them even more beautiful. Saturday mornings became family breakfasts where Noah insisted on making pancakes that were never perfectly round while Lily proudly arranged fresh strawberries into smiling faces on every plate. Ethan pretended not to notice when syrup somehow reached every corner of the table, and Claire laughed more often than she had in years. The little white house that had once echoed with quiet routines slowly filled with new sounds. Lily's laughter drifted down the hallway while Noah patiently helped her learn multiplication at the kitchen table. Claire planted flowers beside the front porch with Ethan every spring weekend, and together they painted Lily's favorite bluebird birdhouse before hanging it near the garden. One afternoon Ethan returned from the marina to discover Lily and Noah sitting cross-legged on the living room floor surrounded by photographs. Emily's memory box rested open between them. Claire looked worried when she noticed Ethan standing in the doorway. "I am sorry," she said softly. "We found the box while looking for the board games." Ethan walked into the room, then knelt beside the children. Noah held up one of the photographs. "We were telling Lily about Mom." Lily looked at Ethan carefully. "Is it okay if we remember people together?" Ethan felt warmth spread quietly through his heart. He smiled and nodded. "That is exactly how love grows. Nobody has to disappear for someone new to belong." Claire watched silently as Ethan showed Lily photographs of Emily teaching Noah to fly. A kite, baking birthday cakes, and laughing beside the ocean. There was no sadness that separated the past from the present. There was only gratitude. Lily listened to every story with the same respect she gave her favorite bedtime books, and when Ethan finished, she carefully placed the photographs back inside the box exactly where she had found them. "She sounds wonderful," Lily whispered. Ethan smiled warmly. "She was." Claire gently rested her hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Thank you for trusting us with those memories." He looked at her with quiet affection. "Families are built by sharing stories, not hiding them." Nearly 1 year after the rainy afternoon at Harbor Point Pier, the four of them returned to the same Italian restaurant where everything had quietly begun. The same warm lights glowed against the brick walls. The same soft jazz floated through the dining room. Even the same hostess smiled as she recognized them. "Your favorite table is ready," she said. They settled into the familiar corner booth while Noah, now taller than the year before, joked that he had almost outgrown the restaurant menu for children. Lily proudly placed a folded piece of paper beside Ethan's plate. "I made you something." Ethan opened it carefully. Inside was another drawing. This time there were 4 stick figures standing beneath an even brighter yellow sun. Beside them sat a small white house with blue flowers blooming in front of the porch. Above the picture Lily had written in careful handwriting, "Home is where people stay." Ethan looked at the drawing for several quiet seconds before smiling through grateful eyes. He folded it carefully and placed it beside the first drawing that he had carried inside his wallet every single day since the night they met. Claire reached across the table and quietly squeezed his hand. No speeches followed. No applause filled the restaurant. Around them people continued eating dinner, laughing with friends, celebrating birthdays, and living ordinary lives completely unaware that one little family had just experienced the kind of miracle that never made headlines. It was the miracle of second chances. The miracle of choosing trust instead of fear. The miracle of children brave enough to ask honest questions and adults humble enough to answer them with truth. Outside, evening settled gently over Charleston as the street lights reflected across rain-washed sidewalks exactly as they had on the night everything began. Ethan looked around the table at Noah, at Lily, at Claire, and finally at the peaceful home they had quietly built together one ordinary day at a time. In that simple moment there was nothing left to prove, nothing left to fear, and nothing louder than the quiet dignity of 4 hearts that had finally discovered the greatest blessing was never finding perfect people. It was finding people who chose, every single day, to stay.